Vergil begins the Aeneid, his timeless epic, with arma virumque cano, Troiae qui primus ab oris. I sing of arms and the man who first from the coast of Troy, and he keeps going for a few more lines. In this video, I'm going to talk about this word here, quae, translated in this example as who, and which introduces a relative clause. But first, here's the full declension of quae, quae, quod. We'll start with the singular. Quae, quae, quod for the nominative. The genitive is cuius for all three genders, and that's a two-syllable word, cuius. And the dative is qui in all genders. The accusative is quem, quam, quod, because remember that the nominative and accusative are identical for neuters. And the ablative is quo, qua, quo. The plural forms are qui, quae, quae for the nominative, because remember that the neuter nominative plural is the same as the feminine nominative singular, so don't get overly confused that the neuter and feminine nominative plurals are the same. Quorum, quarum, quorum for the genitive. Quibus for all three genders in the dative. The accusative is quos, quas, quae, because remember that the nominative and accusative are identical for neuters. And the ablative plural is the same as the dative plural. Quibus, quibus, quibus. So as with any word with 30 different forms, it can be pretty daunting to look at and even to try to remember it all. I think Latin students everywhere have memorized this through rote repetition, and that's not that bad. Qui, quae, quod, cuius, 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 qui, 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 quem, quam, quod, quo, qua, quo, qui, quae, quae, quorum, quarum, quorum, quibus, 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 quos, quas, quae, quibus, quibus, quibus. But you can also try to relate qui, quae, quod to things you maybe already know. The dative singular qui is really similar to the third declension I for the dative. Likewise, quem is like the third declension accusative, and quam like the first declension accusative. And the ablative singular is much like the first and second declension ablatives, the long O and the long A. The plural is much easier. Some are the first and second declension endings, like qui and quae, quorum, quarum, quorum, and quos and quas. Others are like third declension endings. Well, really just the quibus in the dative and ablative. So that's enough for forms. Let's talk about use. Wait, before we do, let's do a couple of grammar terms. First is the term relative, and this comes from the Latin verb referere, which means to bring back or refer. And the relative pronoun, and that's qui, quae, quod, refers to another word. Amicus qui me visitat est laetus. My friend who is visiting me is happy. The word qui is our relative pronoun, and it brings back the meaning of the friend. It refers back to the amicus. And the relative clause is this group of words that the relative introduces. It's a clause because it has a verb, among other things. The other grammatical term that you should know is the word antecedent. Yes, another good Latin derivative. The antecedent is a word that the relative pronoun, the qui, quae, quod, refers to. It's literally the word that goes, that's the part from cedo, before, from ante. So in our sentence, amicus qui me visitat est laetus, the relative pronoun is qui, and the antecedent is amicus. With those two terms, I think we can start looking at use in the Latin sentence. There are two major rules for the relative pronoun. The first, the relative pronoun will be in the same gender, and that's masculine, feminine, or neuter, and number, and that's singular or plural, as its antecedent. So amicus is masculine singular, so we will use the masculine singular form of the relative, qui. And the second, the relative pronoun gets its case from how it's used in the relative clause. Here, the relative clause is qui me visitat. Since the relative pronoun is the subject of visitat, the friend is the one doing the visiting, it will be in the nominative case, qui. Let's look at another example. Filia, quam mater vocabat, vilam intravit. The daughter, whom the mother was calling, entered the house. Which daughter entered the house? It's the one the mother summoned. Here, the quam refers to filia, and since filia is feminine singular, so is quam. But quam is the direct object of vocabat, so it will be in the accusative case. Pueri, quibus cum puellae ludunt, in foro discunt. Oh, this quibus cum is how the Romans did cum quibus, with whom. They appended the cum to the end of quibus instead of making it a separate word before it. This happens with other words, like, for example, me cum, with me, nobis cum, with us. Accept it, learn it, and file it away in that memory of yours. Okay, back to this sentence. The boys, with whom the girls play, learn in the forum. Here, the antecedent of quibus cum is pueri, and since pueri is masculine plural, quibus is masculine plural. And since cum takes the ablative case, quibus is in the ablative. I've given you just 3 examples, and I could do many others, but I want to make the relative clause digestible in moderate chunks. And I also don't want to overload you with a whole lot of different examples. You can find more online or in a book. I do want to look back at our 3 examples again, though. First, amicus qui me visitat est laetus. You can think of this as 2 separate thoughts, one embedded in the other, and we can replace the relative pronoun with its antecedent itself. So there's the amicus est laetus, and that's our main clause. But there's also the thought amicus me visitat. In order to combine these 2 sentences into one, where one kind of depends on the other, we replace the common word with the correct form of quae, quod. In this case, quae. Here's the second. Filia quam mater vocabat, velam intravit. The antecedent of quam is filia, so we can substitute the quam out, but be careful, we have to make sure we put filia into the correct case. Quam is accusative, and so the correct form is filiam. Filia, velam intravit, the daughter entered the house, and filiam mater vocabat, the mother was calling her daughter. In one, the filia is doing the action, in the other, she's receiving the action, but that's okay, because when we combine these again, we'll just put our relative pronoun into the accusative case. In this case, quam. And here's the third. Pueri quibus cum puellae ludunt in foro discunt. The antecedent of quibus cum is pueri, so we substitute quibus cum out with cum pueris. Remember, cum takes the ablative case. Pueri in foro discunt, and cum pueris puellae ludunt. And let's look back at our phrase from the beginning of this video. Arma virumque cano, Troiae qui primus ab oris. The antecedent of qui is virum because that's the only masculine singular word previous to the relative. Arma is neuter plural, and Troiae, which actually belongs inside the relative clause, is feminine singular. Vergil doesn't even have to put qui next to virum in order for us to know that it's the man who, because of the gender and number of both these words. And qui is the subject of the relative clause, which is why it's in the nominative case. Oh, and one more thing. The English relative pronoun is actually one of the few words that shows some soft footprints of a case system in English. We use who for subjects, whose for the possessive, and whom for objects. He, his, and him is another example, she, hers, and her, too. This is neat because it shows that Latin with its case system isn't so foreign after all. It also shows one of the benefits of learning Latin because you really get a good sense of the difference between the subject of a sentence and the object. Then you'll know the proper use of the words whom and whomever. And these words should never be the subject of a verb, even though I hear them being used as such all the time. Okay, back for a quick review of the relative pronoun. The relative pronoun in Latin is quae, quod, which has forms in every gender, number, and case. The relative gets its gender and number from its antecedent, the word that it refers to, and that should make sense. If your antecedent is a singular male, then its relative pronoun should reflect that. Same as if we're talking about many women. The relative pronoun should be feminine plural. However, it gets its case from how it's used in the relative clause, and this should make sense too. If the who word is the subject of its clause, then it should be in the nominative case. If the direct object, then in the accusative case.